News from Washington that is shocking, but at the same time explains Donald Trump's behavior in recent weeks. The Pentagon wants to shift its deterrence strategy from Russia and China to internal threats. As reported today by Politico, the Pentagon is considering the possibility of reformatting its strategy, so that more attention is paid to the defense of its own territory in the Western Hemisphere, instead of focusing on distant expeditionary missions and the struggle for dominance somewhere out there in Asia and Europe. And now, in the Pentagon's project, the words homeland and Western Hemisphere appear as key reference points of the new military doctrine. And this is a very important point to pay attention to, because let me remind you, at the very beginning of Donald Trump's presidency, his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, was talking about exactly this. At that time, this news was mostly ignored. He stated that the United States of America should accept the fact that the world is multipolar and that Americans should focus exclusively on their own territory and their so-called backyard. My name is Alex Pici. Today is September 6th. And before we start this episode, I want to make a small confession. You know, from being oversaturated with news, from constantly working with the newsfeed, once a week I pour out my soul to a psychologist just so I don't burn out. If you need a daily gentle push to take action, I want to recommend a good YouTube channel where every day there are short videos from a psychologist about how to get out of procrastination, gather your thoughts, and avoid burnout. And not just that, it's a normal practical tone without, any pseudo-guru stuff. That's why I recommend this YouTube channel. I'll leave the link in the description for this video, and I suggest you subscribe and save a couple of videos to watch again.
Boundaries aren't cold, they're honest. You don't need to be available constantly to be loved. Editor.
So, what does the news that the Pentagon wants to focus its activities exclusively on the domestic market rhyme with? If I can put it that way. With the recent stance of United States Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who said that the armed forces need to be restored in a historic way, revive military ethics, and restore deterrence. On the official Pentagon website, it is stated as follows. President Donald Trump has given us a clear task: to achieve peace through strength. We will do this in 3 ways. We will restore military ethics, rebuild our army, and reestablish deterrence. And then there's a long paragraph that is important to quote in full because it is the key to understanding the current decisions in Washington. We will revive military ethics and restore trust in our armed forces. We are American warriors. We will defend our country. Our standards will be high, uncompromising, and clear. This isn't some kind of information leak through journalists. This is a direct public speech by the United States Secretary of Defense, published on the DefenseGo website. Now, the context of the day which really infuriated part of the European press. At the same time, the topic of renaming the Department of Defense back to the Ministry of War came up. Why back? I talked about it in the previous episode on my YouTube channel, so go there and be sure to watch it. Here, the politician conveys the mood in the Pentagon, saying that they are outraged, meaning there's anger and confusion among American military and civilians. Because the brand is the Ministry of Defense, not the Ministry of War, and that's not just a sign, it's a network of laws, procedures, funding, and so on, all tied specifically to the name Ministry of Defense. That is, you can't just change the sign and that's it. No. You have to completely change the entire architecture of the Ministry of Defense, which is now called the Ministry of War in the United States. Well, Fox News, on the other hand, is pushing a different angle. They say that this is a return to basics, a return to history and the Ministry of War as a declaration. Like, enough with the defense bureaucracy, it's time to firmly restore order in the power structure. This is a statement from the same Pentagon, it's on Fox News, and it's the same set of arguments that we're simply restoring historical justice. Because, indeed, before 1947, the United States had a Department of War, not a Department of Defense. Okay, let's break everything down. First, no, the United States is not leaving China and Russia. So the statement that they want to reorient their strategy and, no longer contain the Russians and Chinese, focusing solely on their own security, doesn't quite reflect reality. The publication Politico is not talking about abandoning, but about reprioritizing. If before the focus was on global expeditions and the constant presence of American troops everywhere, now they want to strengthen the domestic framework. This includes missile defense, air defense, the resilience of the satellite constellation, protecting critical infrastructure from cyber attacks, and strengthening security in their own backyard, as they call it, from Alaska and the Arctic to the Caribbean. In simple terms, less dispersion around the world, more hardware at home, and security at home comes first. This makes sense, especially in light of three things: massive global positioning system jamming in Europe and the Atlantic, threats to satellites, and the vulnerability of port logistics to drones and cyber attacks. Second, yes, Americans will now be tougher with Europe. The same policy in the original. Describes the White House's position like this: let the Europeans pay more and take on the basic level of security themselves. Training, repairs, air defense, and logistics. This is also evident in another news feed today. Let me remind you that the United States is cutting the so-called Section 333 and putting it into question. Baltic Security Initiative. These are training programs for NATO troop interoperability for the Baltic countries and the eastern flank. I discussed this in more detail in one episode on my YouTube channel. Check it out and watch. So now, this is the Pentagon's attempt to reformate its activities, not to bring order around the world, but first and foremost to bring order at home. The message is clear. So, more or less, the Pentagon is trying to tell us that they're focusing on China and on themselves, while you, meaning Europe, should focus on your own territory. It's unpleasant, but it's not a tragedy. This is tough bargaining over the redistribution of costs. Again, I've already made a separate story about this. Third, what will actually change in the Pentagon's functionality? Some of the money and attention will go to air defense and missile defense, the so-called homeland defense. That includes sensors, interceptors, satellites, cyber defense, port and airfield protection, logistics resilience, and more. All of this is domestic. This doesn't stop buying major items like fighters, ships, and long-range weapons. But it forces us to be stricter in choosing where and how to keep them. And this, to be continued again, it rhymes with yesterday's message from Pete Hegseth, who said that deterrence needs to be restored. Not because we're looking for conflict, we're not looking for it. We made it clear to China, Russia, and others, but by being prepared, we prevent this conflict. Again, that's Pete Hegseth's statement. Now, the European perspective and Ukraine. Here's the good and bad news. The bad news. The security umbrella from the Americans will automatically become smaller. The good news? It's this very shift that's pushing Europe toward a mission inside Ukraine. Those very security guarantees and a mission that consists of training, repairs, air defense, communications, intelligence, and so on. So that, the war is slowed down not by statements, but by a concrete security framework. And the Paris summit has already repeated this, saying that there are no restrictions on Ukraine's defense. 26 countries are prepared to participate on land, sea, and air. For Kyiv, this means less waiting and more building together with Europeans, but on its own Ukrainian territory. So, as you understand, the focus is now shifting specifically to the idea that each region should take care of its own security on its own territory. For Ukraine, this is actually a good signal. Yes, in this context, renaming the Pentagon to the Ministry of War isn't about aggression, but about strong language within the United States. We're deadly serious again, we're all focused on ourselves and so on. The real shift here is not away from Ukraine or Europe toward domestic issues, but from being scattered around the world to focusing on a strong core at home and among allies. For us, the main point is practically the same: to accelerate the European mission in Ukraine. Because the American security backbone will still be looking toward the Pacific Ocean, and more often will be focused on addressing its own defense shortcomings, on securing its own skies at home, and so on. That means we need to rely less on promises and focus more on counting batteries, stations, repair bases, and so on. In other words, peace through strength is, of course, a nice slogan, but as you can see, in the American version, strength means security at home first, and only then somewhere else. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.